So without further ado, it is 9:06. I want to introduce from National Commercial Bank, Mr. Dane Nicholson, head of the Fraud Prevention Unit, who will lead us off with his presentation. Morning, Dane, and welcome.
Good morning, sir, and thanks for having me, and good morning to the panelists, and good morning to all our listeners. So this morning, I'm tasked with walking us through a short presentation on business in a crime-free environment. And what does that mean? When I first saw the topic, I was a little bit weary as to what does actually a crime-free environment look like? Where does that exist? It means that we'd have to have all things perfect, all things being equal, and I'm not sure where does that exist in this current dispensation. What a lot of persons do not also understand is that cybercrime and brazen hardcore criminality tend to walk a tightrope, because what criminals will tend to do is that they'll use white-collar soft crime to fund their hardcore criminal activities. And hence the reason why it is important, not just for us as financial institutions to take cybercrime seriously, but also the government must also implement strong and strict measures to ensure that when these matters arise and are prosecuted, the penalties associated with them will serve as a deterrent to these type of activity. So my time is limited, so I'll run quickly into sharing some insight as to how we could, whilst not achieve a crime-free environment, but at least create an environment that will seek to reduce and mitigate fraudulent activities from a white-collar crime perspective. So the digital shift in conducting business transactions has created a new paradigm and has not just only affected customer, but business as well. Not only financial institution, all business around the world are seeing a paradigm shift as it relates to how transactions are conducted, especially. So we had started the digital transition before COVID-19, but since the onset of the pandemic, things have accelerated a bit. And as a consequence, whilst there are risks, customer centricity is therefore a key ingredient for the focus for any fraud prevention, detection and fraud management program to be successful. The effectiveness of our mitigation strategies relies on our customer sensitization. Knowing our customers, capitalizing on their transactional behavioral pattern is paramount. Research shows that awareness or customer education is one of the #1 tools available to institutions to fight white-collar crime, and also will inadvertently lead to stemming brazen criminality, given that white-collar crime funds a lot of the criminal activities that are taking place. So awareness, so even if we invest, all of financial institutions or companies around the world generally invest all of their profits, for example, in a robust cybercrime fraud prevention program, but the awareness, the customer education is not there, it will lead to naught, because promoting greater awareness of the various fraud risks and actions that enable customers to safeguard themselves against fraud, this would also aid in helping to change the tolerance levels of fraud across various sectors within our society. And what that means is that if the customers know what to do, then we would empower them, and they would also aid in reducing the levels of fraudulent activities. Prevention, we must also implement a strong fraud control, as well as highlight current loopholes across the various fraud sectors. This would result in reduction in the incidents. And once we build on the awareness, the prevention, we must ensure that enforcement, and enforcement comes in 2 aspects. One, with the financial institution or the company, but also the government from a law enforcement and from a legislation perspective. We have to ensure that we enforce these things, that when the breaches do occur, then quick and stringent actions are taken against those the perpetrators involved. Now, achieving the perfect balance between customer experience and security. So business must walk the tight rope for fraud detection and management. Shut out the fraudsters without deterring legitimate customers. A very critical balance. I know it's difficult for a lot of institutions to follow because what it does, it means that from time to time you'll have, when you're trying to put a fraud prevention program together, the friction, the false positive, but we have to utilize the big data in that regard. Now, there are 5 critical components that, from my perspective, institutions must implement to achieve a customer-centric strategy to deter fraud and reduce false positive. 1, they must adopt a data-driven approach to KYC, to know your customers. 2, apply a right-sized fraud solution to reduce unnecessary customer disruption and better manage risk. Leverage machine learning and real-time data aggregation. And importantly, they must future-proof your fraud detection management system and find that critical balance between customer experience and security. Now, adopting a data-driven approach to KYC. A lot of persons from time to time, when they hear KYC, they associate it with financial institutions only, or entity in the banking industry. No, that all entities have customers and they must know their customers both at the general and at the transactional level. That will help them to understand their customers' behaviors and patterns. So when they detect anomaly, for example, if an entity is in the retail sector and your average ticket for the day is normally 100,000, and then one day you have tickets of 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, that is something for that entity to investigate and look further into, because that might be the sign of criminal activities taking place at your place of business or on your e-commerce platform. Applying the right size. Now, one downside of going after fraudsters is that inevitably there will be some disruption in customer normal use and interaction with the platform. But once customers know that this is for their benefit, they will, for example, if you had a friction on your e-commerce platform to apply card registration to deter bin attacks and fraudsters just wantonly getting access to customer information and apply it on your e-commerce platform. Once the customers know and are educated that this is there for their benefit and to protect them, they will fall in line and accept the friction that is there. Leveraging machine learning. Now, fraud does not, unfortunately, is not a one-to-one, and criminals do not operate on any 8 to 5 like how most of us operate business. Statistics shows that from 2019 up, there's a 17% increase in data breaches and activities associated with credit card fraud online. Also, locally, we have seen a significant increase in social engineering type activities, and that includes smishing, phishing, and those activities that criminals prey on to gain access to customer sensitive information. And that is why the customer education and centricity that I spoke about earlier is absolutely important. For us here at NCB, we have implemented a strict no-click, no-link policy to assist customers with navigating the digital space and future-proofing your fraud management system. It's absolutely important because the only thing that is constant in fraud is change. As you implement best practices and put things in place to mitigate against certain activities, the way you do business change, the technologies change. So it's absolutely important for us to future-proof, and finding that critical balance between customer experience and security is absolutely important, because if we make the platform or our controls too stringent that customers do not find it attractive to do business with us, then you will have a safe and secure environment, but you will not make any profit because you don't have any customer. So you'd have to find that critical balance between customer experience and security. And in wrapping up, modern fraud is done with speed and creativity that business might find difficult to pinpoint and block as it happens. The fraud detection and management solution employed are either still too slow to keep up or partly involve manual review by in-house human item. Both options result in financial loss and reputational damage. So instead of staying with the slow and reactive approach, you must be quick and proactive in fighting fraud. This proactiveness relies on two aspects: putting your customers first and capitalizing on the power of big data. Knowing exactly who your customers are and what they need enables you to strategize that reduce both false positive and overall business costs while keeping you competitive and profitable in the long run. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. Very interesting. Certainly, I want you to stand by for the panel discussion, because I certainly want to find out the link between convenience and efficiency, and convenience and security, for that matter, in terms of the risk management, and also how the cyber criminal is being monitored along with the other types of crimes and its effect on business. And you can tell me from at that point, from the NCB perspective, what you see happening and how it coordinates with the numbers Mr. Anderson is about to actually share. So stand by, and thank you very much for that short but very insightful presentation, and we look forward to your comments later.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. Without further ado, right on schedule, we would ask Executive Chairman, Market Research Services Limited, Don Anderson, to present to us the results of the third quarter 2023 Business and Consumer Confidence Indices survey.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Andre. It's a pleasure to work along with the Chamber of Commerce. And as you indicated, we do have over 22 years of data. So it's a lot of data. We have a considerable trend of information that we're working with. What we're here to do this morning is to present the findings of the third quarter, results of the third quarter in 2023, basically covering fieldwork from June, middle of June through to middle of September. A little background is important. We interviewed in excess of 600 persons, 635 to be exact. 635 persons were interviewed in the consumer phase, and we had over 100 firms of different types across the industry spectrum who responded to our questionnaire over this period. So the data that we will be presenting will cover those two sets of respondents. Now, how I want to treat the data today is that I want to look at how the third quarter compares to the second quarter and the first quarter of 2023. I want to cover that first of all. And then in the charts that you will see that are related to these, we're going to be looking at how the period under review compares to the corresponding period last year. So we're going to be comparing quarter 3 of 2023 with quarter 3 of 2022 to see what year to date the change has been, right? So that's how we want to approach the presentation this morning. We start with the consumer confidence. Optimism shifts slightly upward in the third quarter of 2023. The consumer confidence index returned to 161 points, reflecting an upward shift of 2.1 percentage points. This does not necessarily indicate that consumers have regained confidence, but it does indicate that confidence has stabilized at around 160 points over the last 2 years. Important to note when we get to the comparison year to date, this will in fact emerge as something important to note. How do consumers feel about current economic conditions? Again, this is slightly up. The index of current economic conditions recorded a slight upward movement of 2.7%, moved up to 206.2 points in the index compared to 200 in the second quarter. So consumers' perspective of current jobs is slightly down. but their view of business conditions is slightly up, and you might find this to be a little bit of a dislocating factor, but this is precisely what emerged out of the data. And consumers are confident about their own situation, but not necessarily about the overall economy and how it is moving. So we will look at that when we compare year to year. What about expected economic conditions? We have experienced over the last couple of quarters, say from the third quarter of 2022, a downward trend in how consumers feel about current expected economic conditions. But the index of expected economic conditions changed direction in the third quarter of 2023, recording an upward movement from 143 points to 146 points. It's not a huge improvement, but worthy to note that that is consistent with the more positive view that consumers have of the overall situation in the third quarter compared to second quarter. What about current business conditions? The index of current business conditions moves up, representing the last two quarters, or reflecting or changing, reversing the last two quarters downward trend. And it is highest since the first quarter of 2020. So it's up to 100 points from 94 points in quarter two. And this is a noticeable positive movement of 6.6 percentage points. What about expected business conditions? All these are factors that consumers reflect upon, and in their responses to our questions, they give us the answers from which we plot this data. Consumers' expectations about future business conditions are also up from 97 to 103 points. Again, a movement of plus 6.7 percentage points. Interestingly, whilst the proportion of consumers who expect future business to improve has remained unchanged over the last quarter, the proportion who expect a worsening changed meaningfully from 29% to 21% in quarter three. In other words, consumers are generally more favorably disposed to how business conditions are likely to move in the next year.
Don, you'll be sharing the presentation shortly, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. I'm going through the quarter by quarter data,
Yes,
and then when you
Cool.
look at the charts, we will be able to compare and look at the third quarter in comparison to the last year situation. So all this will become evident. What about current and expected jobs? Interestingly, up to quarter three, 2023, the data has revealed some degree of uncertainty about current and future jobs amongst consumers. For the first time over the last 6 quarters, the data has shown consistency in their attitudes about current jobs, and this is a downward pattern. Current jobs recorded a downward change of minus 3.1%, while the expected jobs reported a change of 2.1% downwards. So in other words, despite the positives which they have expressed about the economy, about the expected change in the business environment, they remain pretty pessimistic about the job situation and expected jobs. Okay? So what does this mean? 56% of employees express some degree of doubt about the future of their current job. So the majority, 44%, express strong confidence that they will be employed in their current job over the next year. So in addition to reading the environment and saying, well, we think it's going to be not as good as it is currently, they're also talking about their own situation, and 56% of the persons that we interviewed expect a job change. Whether it's a job loss, we're not sure, but a job change. They don't expect to be in their same job. So we want to reflect upon what are the factors that condition how they feel about the economy, how they feel about businesses. Crime and violence is a major concern. Nearly 6 out of every 10 consumers interviewed, 58%, cited crime as the #1 problem facing Jamaica at this time. This is predominantly amongst females 55 years and over, and those in the low, middle, and low income groups. They were especially concerned about the crime situation. So we need to note that one of the key factors that is depressing the level of confidence that consumers have in the economy and amongst the business sector is the level of crime. All right. So we want now to look at some of the factors that, not some of the factors, but look at the situation, how it compares year to year. And we will therefore see a little bit more clearly what is happening as far as consumers are concerned. So I'm going to begin to share my screen and to, in fact, look at what we are seeing as key factors that impact how we look at the whole situation. All right. So we want to look first off at what we have established over the period of the year vis-a-vis the last quarter. So we have already talked in terms of that 2% positive movement upwards in terms of consumer confidence, right? And that is very clear. Now, what does this mean in terms of the last year's activity? Current conditions, when we look at current business conditions and current jobs. So we see that 63% in third quarter 2022. Let me just in fact get you a full screen. Great. So in the third quarter of 2022, 63% of persons said, well, you know, current business conditions are average. That moved up to 69%. But more importantly, there's hardly any change at the top in terms of how people felt about those who felt good about current business conditions. So 14.3% in the third quarter of 2022 felt that current business conditions were good. That moved up marginally to 15.4%. So we can see, therefore, that this would have impacted the overall confidence level that we reflected in third quarter 22 vis-a-vis second quarter 23, third quarter 23 vis-a-vis second quarter 23. Marginal movement upwards. And hence this is reflected in that marginal increase in consumer confidence quarter to quarter. So it's a pretty consistent pattern across the year. What about current job situation? Consumers have never felt that jobs are plentiful. In the third quarter of 2022, 9.1% said that jobs were plentiful. What is the situation in third quarter 2023? 9%, the same number. So there's really no movement in terms of the perception that consumers have of the fact that the jobs are plentiful. They really don't think it is plentiful, 9%. At the other end of the scale, 51% in the third quarter of 51% in the third quarter of 2022 felt that jobs were in short supply. So that fell slightly to 47.4% in the third quarter of 2023. But the overarching factor is that consumers are not overly confident. They're very wary about the job situation. They don't think, a lot of them, that they will be in the same job next year. And as a result, consumers they're expressing the same view that they had held last year, that jobs are going to be in short supply and only marginally adequate. All right. Now, what about expected business conditions? We talked about the quarter to quarter situation. We look at the third quarter 2022, 34.4% felt that the business conditions were going to be better. That fell to 24.6% in the third quarter of 2023. So we can see consumers being pretty uncertain about the overall situation. On the one hand, they're saying, well, we're a little bit more confident compared to the second quarter of 2023. But when you look at it across the year, consumers are no more confident than they were a year ago in terms of expected business conditions. What about expectations with regard to jobs? 35.2% had a pretty positive view in the third quarter of 2022. That fell to 25.7% in the third quarter of 2023. So again, we're seeing that even though there was a slight uptick across the third quarter compared to the second quarter of 2023, that across the year, consumers are no more positive about their own situation than they were a year ago. Very interesting to note. So what about expected change in income? This is interesting because it is flat. In the third quarter of 2022, 49%, almost half of the persons that we interviewed, and we would have interviewed about 630 persons in the same period, they said that their income would increase. This is the same number in the third quarter of 2023. So even though they are expressing some degree of optimism, when you look across the year, they are no more positive than they were a year ago. What about purchase intent, though? This is very interesting to note that against the background of the kind of uncertainty which they are now viewing the situation, there has been a significant increase. It's not a huge percentage because we're dealing with low numbers, but 8.8% in the third quarter of 2022 had plans to purchase a home. That moved up to 13.2% in the third quarter of 2023. So we can see year to year that there has been a significant, relatively so, positive movement upwards in purchase of home, intent to purchase a home. What about vehicle intent? That also moved up from 17.8% to 23.1% in the third quarter of 2023. So year to year, there has been a 6 percentage point positive movement. What about vacations, taking vacations? 29.3% in the corresponding period last year, third quarter 2022, said they would be preparing to take a vacation. That moved up to 38.1%, which is the largest significant increase across the three variables of purchase that we looked at. So generally, when you compare year to year, there's been a significant overall increase in the number of persons who intend to buy a home, buy a vehicle, or take a vacation. It is only marginally reflected quarter to quarter. So almost back to square one. What does this mean overall for the index? So we've been comparing the last 5 years. The peak, of course, was in 2019 before COVID, where the consumer confidence index was 180.2 points. It fell during COVID to 150, dramatic. Fell even further in 2021, the peak of COVID to 140. But in 2022, it picked up to 160. Where is it now? It's 160, 159.9. So in a way, you could say that it has leveled off. All right, it has leveled off, and we will watch the trend to see where this goes. But it says that that dramatic increase from 21 to 22 was reflected or was driven to a large extent by the fact that we were loosening the economy, so loosening the kind of constricts on the economy. People were beginning to go back out to work, businesses were opening up again, and generally there was a huge push of 20 percentage points between 2021 and 2022. We're seeing now that in a way, people are saying, you know, we've kind of leveled off now at 160. We'll wait to see what the fourth quarter of 2023 will bring to bear on our evaluation. Okay? So in a nutshell, consumers are seeing that, you know, we're coming out of the COVID challenges. We're reflecting upon the situation. It is taking a while. We haven't moved at all, really, between 2022 and 23, but consumer confidence is up a little bit quarter to quarter, 2023, and one obviously would want to hope that this degree of positives continues and that people become more and more confident about where they are. At the moment, it basically is, it has stagnated. It held firm, basically, across the year. So we really aren't any different, any better off, so to speak, in terms of how consumers feel about the economy and about the businesses, about the business sector. And we note that they are no more positive about their own situation than they were in 2022. But it is interesting to note against that background that there has been a greater propensity to or desire to buy a home, buy a car, or take a vacation. So I want to look at those persons who believe that business conditions would get better, which of course we recognize is a pretty low number. It's 20.6% in the third quarter of 2023 compared to 20%. So there's not a lot of movement there at all. In fact, really no movement. I want to know, therefore, what are the reasons that people are advancing for believing that the economy is going to get better, that business conditions are going to get better over the next year? First one, and this is not necessarily in order of strength of importance, but the 5 key reasons that they advanced were as follows. The economy is showing signs of improvement. Entrepreneurship is on the rise, and we can see from the number of new businesses which are coming on stream that what COVID has done is to spawn a real birth, if you wish, of entrepreneurship in this country. Lots and lots of new businesses are being set up. People are just being optimistic. People are saying, well, things are beginning to get better. I believe it's going to get better. And that's one of the 5 reasons that they advanced for saying that the economy is going to get better over the next year. There have been some growth in some sectors. People have talked about that. And we will see when we get into the business sector that they, in fact, identify the sector that is one that they believe is poised for greater growth. And finally, they're saying, well, we believe things are going to get better because people are beginning to go back to work. The work situation is loosening, if you wish. The kind of restrictions that we evidenced and we experienced during COVID are now being relaxed, and people are definitely becoming more and more, prepared to go out to work. So these are the 5 top reasons they advanced as to why they believe that the economy is going to get better in the next 12 months. Of course, the large majority feel, based on the data that we read before, that business conditions are likely to get worse, all right? In fact, increased, we can see over the period. Now, what are the reasons why they advance? People are saying, well, sure, let me go down rather than up. People are saying the high cost of living is a serious impediment. This is what is going to condition in my mind, a negative kind of perspective of the economy and business conditions, the high cost of living. Lack of employment. People are saying jobs are scarce. Jobs have never been plentiful, and people are pessimistic about the future of the job environment. They're also talking in terms of increasing crime. Very important factor. Government is not assisting enough. They keep speaking about government's efforts in this regard. And finally, they talk about the unstable, the instability of the foreign exchange market. So these are the 5 reasons, top reasons that they advance for holding the view that business conditions will worsen in the next 12 months. So we note that more persons feel business conditions are going to worsen than those who feel that business conditions are going to get better, okay? What are some of the other factors? We looked at, and we were going to look at maybe about a year ago or more, how people felt about the cost of living, prices of items that they buy on a regular basis. And the data has been consistent quarter to quarter. Over 90% of all persons that we interview speak in terms of their experience in increased prices as they go to shop for day-to-day items. We're not talking about luxury items. In fact, 79% say that prices have increased significantly. Again, 16% that the prices have increased moderately. That's almost everybody. 95% of those that we interviewed cite cost increases as an important factor in their lives on a day-to-day basis, right? So we added a few questions. One of the questions that we wanted to know is, well, what is the critical issue facing the country at this point in time? What is the most critical issue that needs to be addressed urgently? These were not prompted. These were all volunteered responses, and we simply analyzed them subsequent to receiving the verbatim responses from persons. Bearing in mind, we're talking to over 630 persons, and the margin of error plus or minus 3.9%. The largest single factor identified by consumers was crime and violence. 58% of all persons interviewed said crime and violence is the most critical issue that needs to be addressed urgently. That is followed by unemployment at 17%, poverty at 7%, corruption and favoritism at 4%, stabilizing the dollar at 2%, educational issues at 2%, political squabbles at 1%, and we could go down. The numbers get lower. So we just want to highlight the critical factors that people speak to as issues that need to be addressed urgently. Crime and violence at 58%, unemployment at 17%, poverty at 7%, top the three most critical issues that need urgent attention, right? What's important to note, we asked persons, well, how do you feel about crime and violence over the next 12 months? What's the change that you expect? And it is very, very kind of worrying to note that 60% of those who cited crime and violence as the most critical issue that needs to be addressed now believe that crime and violence will get worse. 60% feel that crime and violence will get worse. Only 11% believe that there will be a reduction, 11%. And interestingly, 29% believe that it will stay the same. So people are not at all optimistic. They're very, very pessimistic, in fact, on the state of crime and where it will go in the next year. The large majority are concerned about crime, and the large majority believe it will get worse over the next 12 months. That is by no means comforting information. Okay? So how could crime be dealt with? We again asked persons to volunteer certain responses to tell us what they thought could be done. And here are the verbatim comments that we got back from them. And we accepted more than one answer from persons where they're prepared to give more than one answer. So these numbers will not add back to 100%. 34% said more jobs for young people. So they're related. They're making a connection between the incidence of crime and young people. 30% programs for the unemployed. 29% said more stringent penalties and fines for crimes. 29% said clamp down on corruption. 27% said if we could find a way to, create better paying jobs for the young people. 26% said bring back capital punishment. 19% said better policing. 9% said better international support. And then we have a whole slew of numbers from 2% downwards, so we will not cover those this morning. But again, more jobs for young people, more programs for the unemployed, more stringent penalties and fines for crimes, clamping down on corruption, better paying jobs for the youth, bringing back capital punishment, and better policing are the key factors, the key solutions that consumers advance as ways in which crime could be dealt with. So we spoke to whether or not persons felt they would be employed in their current jobs. Not the majority. There is some positivity, but not sufficiently so. Not a lot of people believe that they will be consistently employed or they will be still employed in their current job over the next year. We've covered that already, so I won't spend any more time on it. There's just this data which I referred to earlier. Okay. We added another question in terms of technology and how technology would is likely to impact their own situation, because the whole question about AI and replacement and displacement of persons is something that is pretty current and is a pretty topical issue. So this question was asked. 9% believe that their job is strongly likely to be replaced by technology. This is supported by 12% who believe that their job is probably likely to be replaced by technology. So that 21%, 1 in every 5 persons that we interviewed, expect technology to impact their current job. Those, of course, who are currently employed, right? 27% weren't sure. They say it might or it might not. We really don't know, all right? Most importantly, 36% said that my job is strongly unlikely to be impacted by technology. They don't expect to be replaced by technology. So this is the first time we're dipping into this particular issue, and it's important to use this as a benchmark, because as we go further into discussion about AI and the impact it might have on jobs, we will be covering this quarter to quarter. We will then be able to track it over a period of time. At the moment, there isn't a huge degree of concern about AI and other technology formats replacing them in their jobs. Okay? What are the kinds of ways in which people are quarantining themselves using technology? We're talking about mainly using apps on mobile devices, mobile device use, 75%, 60% in online banking, 49% in computer usage, just in terms of their desktop, in terms of their laptop, online shopping, 49%, 43% in terms of delivery services, and 17% in terms of virtual or online healthcare facilities. So this particular table talks in terms of how people are currently using technology. And topping the list is apps on their mobile devices, followed by mobile devices used in terms of tablets and smartphones, right? So Christmas is around the corner, and we wanted to know, because this is feeding to how businesses will respond. We wanted to know, well, do you have plans for Christmas? What are your plans for Christmas? Well, 64% said, we really don't have any special plans. So 2 out of every 3 persons that we interviewed said, we really aren't, and maybe they haven't begun to think it through yet, but at the moment they're saying, no, we don't really have any plans. But 22% said, we're going to have a family get together, which is pretty consistent with our kind of culture. 8% said, we're going to travel overseas. 8% said, we're going to renovate or redecorate our home. 6% said, we're going to take a vacation in Jamaica. And 2% cited other ways in which they intend to deal with Christmas. All right. So for that 36% who said, yeah, we're going to make some special plans for Christmas, we asked them, how are these plans going to be financed? And very important to note, 81% of all persons said they're going to be financing them through personal savings. 26% said friends and family will chip in. So more than one way, eh? And 6% will use their credit card, 3% will get a bank loan, and 6% said other means. So that 34% intend to use a variety of means to finance their Christmas plans, right? Finally, on the consumer issue, consumer side, we look at a very important variable that really in 2011 thereabout, we said we couldn't understand some of the plans that consumers were making against the background of what seemed to have been challenging times. We said, well, there has to be some explanation. And the Chamber of Commerce hit upon this whole thought about looking at remittances. Remittances play a very significant role in helping people see through their daily existence. And from a period of 2011 through to 2020, just at the onset of COVID, we can see that we averaged about 35% of households across the island in various socioeconomic groups, various age groups, were receiving remittances. With the onset of COVID, that fell to 29%. And by 2022, that number of households receiving remittances fell to 26%. Obvious reasons. We receive remittances from countries that were severely impacted by COVID, and that led to a significant fall off in the incidence. It's picking up. And so far in the 3 quarters of 2023, the number of households receiving remittances has moved up by 2 percentage points. And we believe based on the overall assessment of global situations, that pattern will continue, and we will probably get back to a situation where a third of the persons across Jamaica currently receive remittances. All right, but very important that we track this constantly, because remittances, we know based on data, goes significantly to helping the large majority of persons in the lower, middle, and lower income to meet their daily expenses. Very little remittances are saved. We want to go to the business confidence, and I will just leave my chart there. I will stop sharing for the moment and talk in terms, as I did for the consumer phase, the quarter-to-quarter comparison, and then I will get into the year-to-year situation, where I believe that way you get a really good bird's eye view of the data. So we want to look at what businesses are saying. And in this situation, we indicated that we interviewed over 100 businesses across the industrial segment. We have a pretty good perspective of all the various categories and types of businesses, the industry types, in other words, and therefore the data can be said to be representative of the business population in Jamaica. All right. So what are businesses saying? Like the consumers, business confidence is up. The index of business confidence reported an increase between Q2 and Q3 from 138.2 points to 144.7 points, representing a change of just under 5 percentage points. This change is due to significant improvement in the firm's financial standing, profit performance to date, and expectations about future profits. 3 factors impacted this improvement in business confidence. I repeat, improvement in their firm's financial standing, their profit performance to date, and expectations about future profits. So let's look at some of the factors that drill into this overall confidence then. The index of current business condition moves upward. Optimism about future business conditions is also up. Return on capital investment is up. So these are 3 critical factors that feed into how businesses feel about their own situation. And we're saying that they're pretty positive about current business environment. They're optimistic about business conditions moving upwards, and they believe that the return on capital investment is also up. What's interesting to note also is that firms are more certain about the climate for investment. Now, they're moved up from second quarter to third quarter, right? 57% of the firms in the third quarter agree that the climate is good for investment, which is a change of 4 percentage points over the second quarter. There's still a significant number of persons. When we have a 57% reading, it means that, well, maybe some people are not so sure, and a lot of people are definitely not of the view that the business climate is great for investment. And so it is, that 57%, more than it was in the second quarter of 2023, believe that the climate is good for investment, and therefore they would encourage others to invest. This is only a marginal increase and does not take us anywhere near to what it was prior to COVID. So it's important to note that. Right? So the proportion of those who are uncertain decreased by 9%, but those who believe that things are likely to be not as good also increased, so that there's only a marginal overall net increase in the number of firms who believe that the climate is good. So there's not a strong degree of bullishness in the economy at this point in time. Okay. What's interesting to note is that the second quarter of 2023 recorded an upward movement of 13.5% on the expectations for the economy. 13.5% was up. But the index is down in Q3 back to 118.8 points, down from 130. So businesses are a little bit ambivalent about their own situation. They're looking at profits as being going up. They're looking at, businesses, my whole business climate maybe a little bit better, but I'm not sure about the economy going forward. And they're therefore a little bit reserved about the economy and where it is likely to go. The index of expected change in firms' financial standings has climbed from its downward path recorded over the last 4 quarters, and the index is now up to 180 points from 168 points in Q2, reflecting a change of 7.2 percentage points positively so. The large majority of firms, 83%, report that they expect their finances to improve. 14% expect it to remain the same, while 3% expected to worsen. So there is a general buoyancy, but amidst all the buoyancy, there is a little bit of maybe hesitancy about saying, yes, things are good, things are going to be better. So there are kind of mixed reactions from the business sector in terms of how their whole environment will evolve over the next year. Okay? So what are some of the reasons why firms are a little bit hesitant about being, more positive, if you wish? Firms cite crime and violence as the #1 issue facing the country. Crime and violence as the #1 issue facing the country. Like the consumers, firms generally agree that crime and violence is the #1 issue that the government of Jamaica should address. 43% of the firms indicated so. A significant 38% believe that crime will get worse, so that the views of the business sector are consistent with the views of the consumers, in citing that crime is the #1 challenge and that it will get worse. So that this is something that stands out across the country, both in terms of the people and in terms of businesses. Okay? What are some of the things that business sector believe should be implemented? Greater effort by the police is seen by business leaders as the #1 solution to the crime problem. Whilst jobs for young people, no different from how the consumers feel about the crime situation. But I want you to hold in mind, therefore, that the business sector is reluctantly accepting that things are getting better. It probably is the best way to put it. They can see their profits moving up. They're seeing, the business environment improving. But in terms of looking down the road to the next 12 months, businesses are saying we're facing challenges. And one of the big challenges to business growth at this time, echoed by nearly half of all the businesses interviewed, is that crime and violence is a massive problem that we need to address. And they expect it to get worse based on what they believe are the trends. So we want to look now at where we are. And I'm beginning to share again. We can see where for that 5% of businesses believe that the climate is better. 5%. Confidence has grown Q3 compared to Q2. Right? So we just need to hold that in mind as we look at the rest of the data. What about their current profit situation year to year? And we will see when we get more into these charts that the consumer data and the business data almost is moving along a pretty parallel line, because 25.4% in the third quarter of 2022 said that, boy, profits are better than expected. It's no different in the third quarter of 2023, 25.4% down to 25%, hardly any change, right? 55.9% in the third quarter of 2022 said that things were as expected, as expected. 61% in the third quarter of 2023, 6 percentage points more than in the same period last year, said it's as expected. To note that there's been a decrease in the number of firms that felt that their profit situation was worse than expected. So if you wish, there's a slightly upward improvement, and this is what fed into that notion that they believe that profits are a little better than last year, but again, it is really a conservative position that they're taking. What about investment expansion? We note that 57% of the firms that we interviewed say that it is a good time to invest. And that 57% represents an improvement over the second quarter of 2023, but it is down on the corresponding period last year, because last year, the third quarter of 2022, that number was 61%. Again, you know, the kind of hype coming out of COVID, and people are saying, no, things are happening. No, we need to expand and you know, improve our capital expenditure, spend more money, building out our businesses. 61% third quarter of 2022, that fell to 57% in the third quarter of 2023. So we need always to contextualize the shifts that are taking place. Okay? How do they feel about the economy? Here's where, again, we are experiencing or we're seeing the kind of conservative approach. In the third quarter of 2022, 55% expected the economy to get better. COVID was, you know, being pushed back, businesses were reopening, and I think there was a fair degree of buoyancy at that point in time. We note that in the third quarter of 2023, that number fell to 41%, a significant fall off in the number of businesses who expect the economy to get better. Significant. What about firms' finances? Here's where there's probably something which is probably counterintuitive, because 80.5% in the third quarter of 2022 said they expected their firm's finances to improve. This is strengthened by a 3 percentage point improvement, 83% in the third quarter of 2023, who said they expect their firm's finances to improve. Now, we sometimes ask ourselves whether this is a hope rather than a real expectation. We won't really know until we begin to drill down into the fourth quarter of 2023 to see whether this is sustained. But to note that more firms this year compared to last year this time feel that their finances will improve. And the same pattern is demonstrated in terms of their profitability, a movement from 71.2% in the third quarter of 2022 80.4% in the third quarter of 2023 amongst those firms who believe that their profit situation will improve, despite the challenges they experience. And perhaps they're now reflecting on the problem that they identified as being a deterrent to greater business growth, which is crime, and the belief that crime will get worse. So we need to, in a way, relate the two situations. So in a nutshell, what does this mean? Where are we now in terms of how businesses feel about their environment? Are they more confident than they were before? We note that the confidence level amongst businesses has been climbing. It went to a depressing 120 points in 2020 during COVID, the height and peak of COVID. It moved up to 124.5 when COVID probably was at its peak, but leveling. It moved to 137 in 2022 when the shackles were beginning to be removed and people were returning to some degree of normality, and then up to 140 in 2023 so far, the 3 quarters that were plotted. So there's been a gradual improvement. The 140 index recorded in the third quarter or so far for 2023 does not take us back to 146, 144 recorded in 2019 prior to COVID. But we will say we're getting there. We can see that businesses are approaching the situation rather cautiously. We're back up to 140, which is close to 144 that was recorded pre-COVID. And hence we could say, businesses are, beginning to feel a little bit more confident. That is reflected in the quarter-to-quarter movement of 5 percentage points, third quarter 2023 compared to second quarter 2023. So a significant number of firms believe that business conditions will get better. We note and we ask them, well, why do you say so? Why do you say so? The first answer that they gave was not necessarily the strongest answer, but there are 5 top answers that we plotted. The economy is recovering. They believe the economy is recovering. Nobody is saying that the economy has recovered because they realize it's still a period of transition, right? some sectors will improve the economy, right? They're being optimistic. So again, very much like the consumers who really aren't basing this optimism on anything concrete, businesses are saying, boy, I just feel things are going to get better. That's one of the reasons they give. Nothing concrete. Government policies are being put in place, and businesses are convinced that this is so, and that it's one of the factors that will drive improvement. And they're saying that they see more and more consumers probably having a greater propensity to spend. Incomes are likely to increase, and people have more spending power. Again, this is nothing that is concrete that we can say, well, yeah, they know and they can point to factors that are driving this. That's probably a degree of optimism that maybe their own subjective reasoning of the situation, right? But a significant percentage believe that business conditions will worsen. And what are the factors? The economy will not improve that quickly. So here's the caution, here's the hesitancy. Unstable foreign exchange, it is one of the factors that consumers cited. Job loss, high unemployment. Again, of course, consumers feed into business success. And they believe that with the job loss and high unemployment, that consumers will not be able to clearly take off the kinds of products that they are putting on the market. Increase in crime factor, cited as a #1 deterrent, cited as a #1 reason why things will not improve at a faster pace. And high prices for goods and services affecting them as well as the consumers. Right? So these are the factors that will inhibit the growth and the expansion and the improvement in the economy. Right? One of the charts that is of recent vintage is this one, because we ask firms that say, well, we intend to invest in capital growth, etc. And we plot that by industry type. We can see in 2022, that was pretty up and down. There are some that were more inclined to do so, and not all of them were. We note that in 2023, there's a certain degree of, I call it stability, because in each case, the majority of firms by type that we interviewed say that they intend to invest in capital growth, that they intend to spend more money on capital plans and therefore grow their businesses. This is right across the spectrum. We can see that one of the bigger ones is travel, is tourism and hospitality, which of course is probably one of the big drivers in the economy at this point in time from all perspectives, right? So very important to note. So we ask them, same question we ask the consumers, what is the most critical issue to address urgently at this point in time? The numbers may not be as high as the consumers, but it is certainly, again, significantly the one that sticks out like a sore thumb: crime and violence. 43% of all businesses that we interviewed said crime and violence is the #1 issue. No surprises. #1 issue that needs to be addressed urgently. Unemployment, and we have a slew of others, but the most significant is the issue of crime and violence. Okay? Again, what are your solutions? Better policing, more jobs for young people. We're finding that the answers are not too dissimilar from the answers that consumers gave. After all, we're all consumers, but the order may be a little bit different, but the factors that are presented by the businesses voluntarily are very much in line with those that consumers articulated, right? And we talk in terms of, how confident are they in, sort of, we identified a number of factors that we believe might contribute to growth. What is the degree of confidence? And we can see that, small business sector, well, yes, roadways, and we list them overall in terms of how they see and the priority they assign to their confidence in the respective variables. And the small business sector at 3.13, roadways in 2.67, health services at 2.49, power supply 2.49, and so on, educational sector 2.45, and ranking all the way down the bottom of the spectrum of degree to which they have confidence in movement, positive movement, is the police at 2.17, right? Very new question that we need to absorb, right? The kind of technology improvement, mainly that they see themselves investing in social media advertising, new customized software, electronic payment solution, virtual security systems, new hardware, and we can see going down what it is that they anticipate spending money on and areas that they will go into as far as technology improvement is concerned. And that is the last chart. So I will stop sharing now.
Thank you very much. Wow. Quite a lot of information there.
Substantial amount.
Quite a lot of information there. And thank you very much, Don Anderson, for a very comprehensive look. The thing that stands out to me, and the media I'm sure is online, is that huge number of businesses and consumers who see crime and violence as the deterrent. And we knew that long ago, which is why we assembled everybody here for this discussion today. But I also notice the cry for more jobs for young people. And I also notice on the other end is that 60% feel that things are going to get worse in terms of consumers. Well, the persons here, I know, are working hard to ensure that it does not get worse. So the first question I would ask of the panelists is our erstwhile past president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Lloyd Diston, to just say from his perspective as chairman of the Consensus Monitoring and Oversight Committee, how do these results that Don Anderson has unearthed correlate or to what you are finding on the ground in terms of your monitoring and oversight and action on these matters? Is this incongruence or is it any different? You're muted, Lloyd. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I thought I'd unmuted before. Sorry about that. As I say, first, let me say thank you to the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce for providing me this opportunity to participate. Morning, Safri Day, in Don, morning all. So definitely congruent. It's very clear over several years. The years, as far as I can recall, the number one issue for businesses coming out to the confidence indices has been the issue of crime and violence. So no surprise there. And that's part of the reason why the private sector was at the forefront of leading the national consensus on building the national consensus on crime. Because it's been a cry from the members across all the private sector organizations for years. There is just by way of a bit of statistics. I recall when we were initially working on the consensus, we were pointed to a study circa 2016. Nothing more recent than that I can find, but indicating that the impact on GDP of crime and violence is somewhere in the region, anywhere from 3.7 to 5.1% of GDP. Now, at the time in 2020, if you're just saying 3.7 or 4% of GDP, that's $100 billion, over $100 billion impact on GDP just from crime. And we say 3.7 to 5%. We say the indirect impact actually escalates all the way to 7%. So it's a huge impact on the economy in total. Andre, just in terms of the statements that we're hearing from the business community in this particular survey, there's no surprise, certainly from the consensus and the stakeholders to the consensus perspective. This jumps out and it just reinforces that it is so important for all of Jamaica to rally behind a program and the programs that will result in a sustainable reduction in crime. I can say so much more, but I know you have other panelists. I'll pause there.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. We'll come back to you on some of those. But certainly, yes, the other important thing I saw done, which I mentioned already, is what people say needs to be done. You know, more jobs for youth, stiffer penalties, etc. So Safri Brown is the project manager for Project STAR, Social Transformation and Renewal. Am I correct, Safri? Is that
yes? Hi, Andre. Yes, it's
right.
Social Transformation and Renewal.
Right. In terms of the concerns of the business and the consumers, in your work on the ground, because I know Project STAR is directly on the ground with these, is the sentiment exactly the same? That's the first question I would put to you. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of not questioning Don's results at all, but just to ensure. I mean, quite likely some of the people Don interviewed are some of the people you interact with every day. So are you getting that same feel that the monster that needs to be tackled, which is the reason for Project STAR, is actually social transformation through reduction in crime and violence? Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we're definitely on the same page. As you know, Project STAR has framed itself to deal with social and economic transformation because we feel that's where the focus needs to be. In order to really be able to effectively address the issue of crime and violence. When we focus solely on crime and violence, we don't necessarily focus our energies and efforts on the root causes. And I know Lloyd is going to talk a little bit about some of the work being done around sort of crime and legislation and so on. But at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we're really addressing root causes, and social transformation, social and economic transformation seeks to do that. And I wouldn't disagree with much in Don's presentation at all. I think in terms of his findings, what individuals are saying, whether it's businesses or regular consumers, about what needs to be done is most of it is pretty much spot on, and that's what we need to be focusing our attention on. And I look forward to getting into a deeper conversation about that and some of the agencies responsible for that area of work.
Thank you very much. We'll talk about what's being done now, so that 60% that's it going to get worse. We can prove them wrong. But
right, and I mean, you have to think about the psyche. Sorry to cut you, Andre. You have to think about the psyche on people who already in a state where crime has been on the has pretty much not subsided at all in many years. Thinking 60% it will not get better. In fact, it will get worse is really concerning for the psyche of the nation. Which is important, where the social intervention comes in. But then, in terms of your consumers, your customers, we have been riddled with not just violent crime, but cybercrime as well. Before you say again, what is being done, are your customers feeling the same way about cybercrimes, and have their fears been allayed at all, or where are we on that journey?
Yeah, so there is still some amount of information deficit, which cause cybercrime and customers to continue to fall victim to those type of activities. The number one tool that is available to us as financial institution and the general corporate world is customer education. The customers who are uneducated, yes, feel the same way about brazen criminality as they feel about cybercrime, because unfortunately it's on the rise. There's a significant increase in the number of customers that is falling victim to phishing, smishing, and other cybersecurity related activities. What needs to happen and what has been happening is that we need to increase customer education around it so that the customers knows what to do. Because if a customer know, for example, that we at NCB, we have a strict no click, no link policy. So if you get an email, an SMS, or a text message which tells you to click on a link, irrespective of what it says, then no. But unfortunately, we still have too much persons clicking and falling victims to it. And when these cyber criminals because they make a lot of money from it, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry globally, they are going to purchase guns that are going to be utilized to reap havoc on our friends and families. So we have to find a way to find that direct correlation between cybercrime and hardcore criminality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. before I get back to Lloyd and Safri, Don, I noticed that that slide that said that the businesses are closer to their 2019 high. I'm trying to remember if it was in terms of their own confidence or if it was in their investment intention. Which was it? You're muted.
I think it's more in line with their confidence levels.
Right.
You know, right, which is an important thing to note. All right, but you know,
Yeah.
you're hedging against a number of things at the same time.
Right, because they're saying that, I think it was 60% of them feel that things are going to get worse. But at the same time, the confidence level is it's quite near to the historical high from 2019. So what accounts for that kind of dichotomy?
Well, businesses don't, I'm going to say this now, which might be contrary to a point I made earlier, but businesses think a little differently from consumers. Businesses think long-term, all right? Consumers think in front of their faces. So they're talking about, what am I going to do tomorrow morning to feed my family, etc. Where businesses are, if you wish, more, they're more long-term and more concrete in terms of their forward thinking. And hence, they tend to have a positive outlook generally, where consumers have to think quicker and make quicker decisions and more immediate decisions. So I think this is what is feeding into that. That is saying we're here for the long haul, and hence, we're going to see it through. Consumers can't afford to think that way. They don't have the luxury to think that way.
All right. Thank you very much. If you could just flip back to that, you don't may have to display it, but probably just narrate it again to us. The slides concerning what consumers and businesses say needs to be done to reduce the instances of crime and violence. If you could just talk those back through for us, and then we'll ask the three panelists how much of that is actually being done, and where we are on the journey in that regard.
All right, let me get down to 1 sec. Share slideshow.
Okay, I think I have it close by here. So maybe while you locate it, I might be able to speak to it.
I'm actually back up again with that.
Okay.
All right. So you're talking in terms of the things that people see as, in a way, solutions to the problem?
Imperatives, yes.
Imperatives, all right. First of all, we know from the consumer side, it had to do with finding more jobs for young people. Reduction in crime, clearly, stops everything, right? Let me get to 1 second. Let me get to, I want to deal with the consumers first of all.
Yes.
Okay. All right, what should be done to address the crime and violence situation? Let's touch on that first, because remember, crime and violence is seen as the #1 deterrent, #1 challenge right now. So what should be done? More jobs for young people, programs for the unemployed. So they're talking about social intervention, first of all, and then more stringent penalties and fines, clamping down on corruption. So these are more related to the systemic challenge in terms of criminality.
Right.
But the top factors really were social intervention issues, more jobs for the young people and programs for the unemployed. Top in the list, 64% collectively.
All right, leave that slide up. Amen, Safri. That's right up your street. Could you say how much of these has been achieved or is being achieved through not just your current social intervention activities through Project STAR, but any others that you are aware of? I'd give you the first bite at this.
Yeah. So I think this is really important for us to recognize that we've really got to put our focus back on social interventions, and we've got to put them back on social interventions in a way that really looks at how we create sustainable delivery of interventions. We can't be dealing with it in a sort of projectized way, where we're going in and we're doing projects for a certain number of time. We've really got to look at how you deliver access to jobs for young people, access to training, social interventions such as sporting. Every community across Jamaica should have sports programs for youth. I can't imagine one community would stand up and say, no, we don't need a football program for youth or a netball program for youth or so on. And so we've really got to start looking at that in a much more sustained way. One of the things that was really, really an important announcement by the government was earlier this year when they dropped all the fees associated with accessing HEARTS training up to level 4. And I don't know if that created as much noise as it should have, because that's a really, really important factor when we talk about access to training and access to employment opportunities for youth. And again, what we're really trying to make sure is that we're reducing barriers to access and we're opening up access to young people. So I think that was a really important move, and really the work that HEART has really started to really do in terms of making sure that any and everybody can access to training is important. Private sector, we've got to make sure that we support with the access to jobs, with making sure that we're able to really guide on what's happening out there, the jobs for the future, jobs that have, sort of greater value. We have great concerns in Project STAR, for example, in some of our communities that we work in, where, basically all the jobs close by are low value jobs in terms of what it can really do. And so how do you treat it more sort of stepping stones? And how do you create an ecosystem that you can generate more value added work? So I think when we talk about the social interventions, we've got to look at it from the perspective of public sector and government, and also civil society. So as you know, Project STAR is really working to develop a model for community development. We work very closely with the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. We work closely with the STC, which is the community development arm of the government. We work closely with HEART, as I'd indicated, JCC, which puts in a huge amount of investment in terms of social interventions. And so really working and strengthening through those agencies, I think, is going to be very, very important. And what I would like to see over time is more focus placed on the importance of the work that they're doing and the indicators and the achievement of the objectives of those agencies. Macroeconomically, we know that we're in a really, really good position.
Yes.
And things are really going in the right direction. And now we need to place some focus on the social agencies.
Right. Have you any success stories from the social intervention standpoint that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots. I think one of the things that we do is we misrepresent what social interventions are there to do. And so, for example, you have a program like the Child Resiliency Program, which is supposed to address specifically children in grade 5 who are at risk of falling out of school. This is an important point where they're just about to move into that transition period into high school. It's one of those development periods in a youth's life where we know they can go in the wrong direction and then end up falling out of the system. And so they do a lot of work, for example, with children to make sure, and parents to make sure that they can segue into secondary school, but that's specifically dealing with a small cohort in grade 5 in the communities it serves. Now, what you'd like to see is a CRP program, for example, extended across and scaled. And this is one of the conversations we have to have. We have lots of successes of individual programs, but they are small in number. And we do have to talk about how we replicate and how we scale and how we mainstream. And mainstreaming is really the idea that it becomes part of service provision by whatever the agency is mandated to do that. And so I think that's important. In terms of STAR, we've been doing a lot of work with regards to employment training, and a lot of that has to do with life skills, because many of the employers out there that we're working with will do the technical training, they'll do the technical job training. But what needs to happen ahead of time is a lot of the skills training that needs to, the life skills that needs to happen. And so we're finding that we need to be investing more in life skills, in counseling, in psychosocial support, and then in systems of support for family members and so on. So these are some of the areas that we're looking at. But we're really starting to see a lot of positive impact there, and we're now at the point where we're really looking at how we scale it to be able to hit much higher numbers. And I think that's one of the things that always becomes that challenge.
Right.
And we're really looking forward to that.
Can you tell us? I've noticed in the media between August and this month, actually, the Red Stripe program.
Right. Yes.
Tell us
that's a partnership with Red Stripe that's really about forklift training and pulling young people into forklift training. Again, it's one of the things that we're losing a lot of in Jamaica. We're losing a lot of forklift drivers that become truck drivers. We're losing a lot of truck drivers to overseas markets. And so the sort of local demand for trained forklift drivers that then sort of segue into truck drivers over time is increasing. So again, making sure that the training that you deliver with your partners is actually in an area where there is demand and again, which provides opportunities for growth. One of the things we have to look at when you talk about, I think it was in one of the other ones, well, better paying jobs for youth. A lot of that has to do with sort of quality employment. And young people, regardless of what their sort of socioeconomic background being, want to know that they have a pathway to development. So they have a pathway to move from a sort of low level, low skill job to, you know, really advance and upskill. And this is the other thing that we're seeing with a lot of the companies we're working with, is that they're doing a lot of internal upskilling because they want to hold on to their people. Again, once they're in there with the right sort of attitude, you know, and that sort of propensity to be able to really work in a productive environment. They want to be able to keep them, and they're doing a lot of upskilling. So we're really seeing a lot of companies coming on as really good partners. I think it's very different now than it has been for many years in the past, is that they're really coming on with a lot of that value added, the things that we know build resilience in individuals, that idea that you have a path, that you have a pathway to professional development, you know, and that you're not just within the specific low skill job sort of eternally. And I think I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening out there with regards to training, upskilling, employment. And if you look at what's happening with HEART and with the private sector, I think that people are really going to be really starting to benefit.
Right. It's a slow process though. It's not an overnight process. And
it's definitely not. But if you look at it, I mean, getting macroeconomic stability wasn't an overnight process,
Exactly.
But we stuck to it, right? There was a commitment over many years to stick to it, and we have to have that commitment here to stick to it. We've got to stick to it. We've got to grow it. We've got to scale it. We've all got to become part of it, just the same way that many individuals have a young person that they support, you know, in their community to go to school, and these sorts of things. We want to see people getting involved in really supporting a local football group or a trainer. You know, the amount of communities that have no Saturday football program for kids, you know, and you wonder yourself, what is it that we expect these young people to be doing? If you think about, you know, a father who lives off Spanish Town Road who has a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old on a Saturday afternoon where they want to go and do something, what do? Where do they go? What do we expect families to be doing on a Saturday afternoon if they don't have, you know, large sums of money? How do we expect them to do all these things? And so we have to generate and come back to these conversations.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. On this list here that Don has provided, the top 7, 3 are directly social and the other 3 are kind of legislative. So Dane and Lloyd now, starting with you, Dane, what is happening as it relates to the cyber crimes laws, and have there been any amendments as it relates to the penalties or whatever else is in place specifically to address criminals, cyber criminals?
So I know that currently there's a review on the way, but one of the things that I'll call for is that if you notice 29% is saying that more stringent penalties and fines are required. Yes, that is definitely something that I will support and call for, especially for persons who make their accounts available to be beneficiaries of these fraudulent funds. We need to have stringent and strict penalties associated with that. And for example, I think Singapore recently passed some legislation which targets beneficiaries of fraudulent funds. It makes it a lot more easier to prosecute them. The burden of proof, similarly to how the lottery scamming law operate, when these type of activities take place, we need to have stringent measures. For example, the minimum sentence to allow your account to participate in fraudulent activities should be 5 years or a minimum fine of $350,000, which will serve as a deterrent to persons making their accounts available to participate in these criminal activities.
Okay. Okay, certainly important information there. Lloyd, from the perspective of CMOC now, could you say, there's a question in the chat, I see it and I'll get to it, thank you very much. But Lloyd, and specifically now relating to what is being done from the legislative standpoint, and what has, and secondly, what has been the effect of the consensus in monitoring the progress? Has that spurred any further action? So two-pronged question there.
So I'm going to probably try to I'm going to seek to respond a bit comprehensively on some of the questions you had asked before, which went to Safri, as well as the points you raised, Andre. And in my comments, I mean, you may want Don to move on to the business slide as well, because I want to touch on both because of the similarities between some of what the consumers are looking for and what the businesses are looking for as well. So from the consensus perspective, the driving things is not so much that we're seeking to put new things on the table. We believe that a number of the plans, the programs that the government have are the right ones. What we are seeking to do is to have a consensus and a support structure that actually ensures that these things get done and push and support the government in getting these programs delivered. When we disaggregate or dissect and to some extent summarize what we see in the consumers and the business response, if you look at the top 7, 8, it falls into what I'm going to say are 3 areas. One is around the social interventions, that's around the jobs, the unemployment, dealing with issues of inequity, which I would like to come back to as well. And so the social programs and interventions that deal with inequity is one area. The other 2 things that jump out is policing, which is the constabulary force, and the second one is around penalties and penalty provisions, which is largely the realm of the justice system. And in the consensus, we really speak about the justice ecosystem. Starts with legislations, which you brought up, and I'll touch on that. Legislations, the transformation that's required to have a more effective, efficient, and resourced constabulary force. The importance of having a justice system that provides swift, fair, and punishments that are right for the crime. And the 4th area is the correctional services. I don't see anything speaking about correctional services in either of these surveys. And that's a huge component when we speak about our recidivism. Somewhere in the region of, I think the number is 40% of people who leave our criminal justice system are back in jail within 3 years. This anecdotal statement that we hear that our correctional services system is almost like a training school for criminals. It's hard to debate it if we're not fixing that as well. So the consensus actually takes a look at the resolution or the solution, the sustainable reduction in crime and violence from as being a more complex solution. Is not just about the treating with the social, cultural, and community transformation that's necessary. It's a complex solution, and it has to be a comprehensive approach to resolving these issues. So if you look at Plan Secure Jamaica, it deals with, which is the government's national security plan. It has 6 strategic objectives. If you look at the national consensus on crime, it actually has 8 pillars. So there's a recognition that to ultimately achieve a sustainable reduction, we've got to go through all of these areas. And so, what Project STAR is doing is definitely a microcosm of what we need to see and the kinds of things that we need to see in treating with the social inequities that exist. Those other huge areas, the constabulary force transformation, and I realize this, it is number 6 or 7 on consumer, it was number 1 on the business. There's a lot of investments that's being made, certainly more than we've ever seen previously, that are being made now. And the actual implementation of the program takes time. So, and I know we are impatient of saying, how long is it going to take? Like with the economy, it took us many years to get there. Crimes, over 40 odd years of unresourced constabulary force, and of course there's structural changes that are necessary, but those things weren't always in place. So the necessity to resource and ensure the transformation is taking place so we have more effective and efficient policing, utilizing the tools and the technology is absolutely important. And we see the resources getting there, and do believe the commissioner has a very clear plan to achieve this. But I do want to also steer us towards this view that many people have to say that, oh, the issue that we have is an issue of poverty, and just giving jobs is going to make a solution. It is only one aspect of the solution. There is a whole cultural shift and change that we require that provides respect for rule of law. And this is not just within the communities. And I'm going to sit here, I'm going to call out the business community as being a component of that. When we look at the issues of corruption, and we spoke, in fact, it was mentioned earlier, the changing face of crime. How crime is funded these days is very different. Cybercrime is funding purportedly funding some of the big gangs. The matters of corruption and diversion of government resources into some of the gangs, however that is taking place, is also apparent. It's one of the things that's taking place. And the role that the business community needs to play in terms of being strong advocates against corruption, against bribery. I'm glad Dean mentioned the act that was put in place in Singapore. Something similar existed in Britain and Canada. It's called the Unexplained Wealth Orders. And it's a change in how our Proceeds of Crime Act needs to look at wealth and how people achieve wealth. So instead of starting off by saying, I have to prove that you have illegal wealth, there's a component that says, well, I'm doing an investigation. I see you have this wealth. Can you show me how you have come by these resources? And it's a very different take on a legislative approach to dealing with unexplained wealth. There's the new Bail Act. There's a new Bribery Act. There's over, I like going back to numbers. When we started this program, we were shared with us somewhere in the region of 400 to 600 penalty provisions that need to be updated, right? So at the time, it has changed now, but at the time, in correctional services, if you're caught taking contraband into the prisons, your fine is like, I don't know, $100 or $1,000. And you could be caught 10 times, and if same fine, $100. And there's no, in our legislation, there's nothing that says I can now put you in jail for trying to smuggle contraband after the third time. So those types of legislations, Andre, definitely kinds of things that are being, but some have changed, but again, we still have somewhere in the region of about 400 that needs to be updated. But would be that would take us in another step in that criminal justice ecosystem to ensure that there is some resistance. Certainly there's a penalty and people feel that there's a real penalty for breaking the law. Right. And again, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I know you have questions to ask about it. But I just want to find those things as a perspective of the more comprehensive approach that needs to be taken to achieving objectives.
So it has to be social, legislative, and rehabilitative.
Legislative, the transformation of the police force, modernization and updating of the justice system, or correctional services obviously needs to be updated and upgraded and improved as well.
Thank you very much. Dean, there's a question in the chat from very early after you spoke, which spoke about you addressed the matters relating to external fraud, but as the man on the hot seat, also have to ask the question about how you guys are dealing with the internal matters and what is being done in that regard to shore up from internally issues, instances of fraud.
So definitely. So internal fraud is something that, for example, us here at NCB, we have a zero tolerance approach to fraud. So irrespective of the dollar value or whomever is involved, the same approach will be taken. That means it will be reported to law enforcement. One of the things that we continuously do is to review our internal policies and procedures to ensure that they are future-proof, to ensure that whatever risk might exist, that appropriate controls are in place to mitigate against it. And that is one of the things that I'll encourage all entities to do, is to ensure that, one, you have a policy that has a zero tolerance approach to fraud. You're not letting anyone through the back door, or there's no discrimination with how you deal with fraud once it occurs. When senior persons are involved in fraud, you treat it a particular way. And when junior persons are involved, there's a disparity. You have to treat both of them the same way. And then also you have to ensure that your policies and procedures are robust and you continuously review them to ensure that the risk mitigating strategies that you have in place is current and up to date to deal with the risk that your business faces, both from an internal and from an external perspective as well.
All right. So there's a grievance in policy and procedure in place for both external and internal, right? I mean, a customer who has been affected or think they've been affected by fraud externally, how do they communicate with the bank? What is the channel to get the issues resolved?
So there are a number of opportunities for persons who are impacted by fraud to reach us. So one, they can report the fraud through our customer care center. They can send us an email, report fraud at jncb.com, or they can send us an email at info@jncb.com, or they can report the fraud through our branch network, so that the matter can be properly investigated. We also have a few other channels that, but it's specific. For example, you can go to Manage My Card at www.jncb/manage-my-card. To have your debit card, credit card restricted, you can report the card lost or stolen. You can request new cards, and you can also dispute transactions on your credit card through that portal. So there are diverse way of reporting fraudulent activities to us for it to be properly investigated.
A question came to me before when this whole thing started to unfold, that I don't want to use an electronic channel to report an electronic related incident. So what, I mean, in terms of face-to-face, what is happening at the branch level to encourage persons to use other channels? Because I might be nervous about sending an email to the office or other on a portal if there are episodes and incidents that involve those same portals.
Well, there's not this, the portals are safe and secure. So when a fraud occurs, it's not necessarily that they target the portal. What might happen, for example, in a social engineering case, is that a customer might unwittingly volunteer their username, password, token codes to fraudsters to conduct activities on their account. So there's no disparity between reporting the fraud digitally or reporting the fraud in person. Whatever the customer is comfortable doing, we have customer service representatives at all our branches that are competent and capable to take customers' dispute and escalate them appropriately to have their matters addressed. But I would not want to get into the argument of whether online report is much more safer than an in-person report. There's no disparity between both. We treat both of them seriously, and appropriate actions will be taken irrespective of how they are reported to us.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I think we have tried to make a link between the instances of high crime and violence with business and consumer confidence. And I thank Don for these new slides, new perspectives brought to the report. Hopefully we can build on it. I don't expect, Don, that if we do those same, if we field the results to those same questions again in terms of what the issues are and what needs to be done, I don't suspect that they will change next quarter. But I hope we can find some way to continue to include this information, possibly to find a way to see if the numbers are changing with the interventions taking place, both from legislatively and from the social perspective, so that we can incorporate whether or not these interventions are effective or not, to address the issue to the businesses and the consumers who have a big problem with crime and violence.
Because I didn't mention that the data that we collected now and the new questions that we included will be a benchmark for future evaluation. So, Safri, I think we'll be able to, over a period of time, see how the responses change. And that would feed into some of the strategies and some of the interventions that you are obviously contemplating. So, yeah, we intend to continue these questions, and it will be, in fact, the current data will be a benchmark to see what kind of change takes place over a period of time.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Don. And I just wanted to add to what Don was saying there. One of the things is when you're looking at the indicators within the community, you know, obviously we look at crime data within the community. You know, has crime gone down? Has it gone up? But we also look at how people feel within the community. Do you feel safer in the community? And you may find that crime is going down in a community, but people don't feel safer. At the end of the day, if crime is going down and people don't feel safer, you're not actually reducing the vulnerabilities, because people are still in a high state of anxiety.
Yes.
And so you have to make sure that your numbers and also how people feel about things, such as, you know, your confidence survey, they have to go hand in hand to really be able to create kind of a sustained change that you want to see.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Safri. So one thing I think we can, Dane, you can probably do here is that a lot of the youth that are marginalized that Safri is working with certainly could be trained and employed to detect and protect against cybercrime. You could, you know, sort of give a lot of these ingenious ideas about creating mischief online comes from persons who are not necessarily in the formal labor force, but they're very skilled at cyber penetration. So probably we could identify and train them to actually detect incidences that are out there of fraud and help you guys to mitigate some of what is happening. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely. And it's something that the NCB Foundation recently also sponsored some cybersecurity students to pay their tuitions and stuff like that to go through university. So it's something that we can explore and see, because anything that will aid in reducing cybercrime is something that we take seriously and worthwhile looking at. So we'll take that and look at that initiative to see how we could partner with Project Star to achieve ultimate aim and objective in that regard. Some of those very persons are also victims, and they rent their accounts to criminals. It's not necessarily that their intentions were bad, but it's that they don't have the requisite knowledge, competence, and capability to know that when somebody comes to you to tell you that they want to borrow your account and they'll pay you a fee of $10,000 or $20,000, that actually is a multi-million-dollar industry and criminal activities taking place. So a lot of that, also what we can do is to aid in providing customer education to them, to let them know that these activities are wrong and they should not participate in them.
Thank you very much. That's a wrap. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you all for sticking with us. I hope you found this discussion useful as we really try to focus in on a vision of having smoother business in a crime-free environment. I thank our sponsors, NCB, NCB Capital Markets, our presenter, Dane Nicholson, Head of Fraud Prevention Unit, certainly our panelists, Lloyd Chairman of CMOC, and of course, Ms. Safri Brown, Project Director of Project Star, and certainly last and not least, Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited, Mr. Don Anderson, for a well put together presentation as usual, very insightful. I trust that you all found it useful, and we look forward to you joining us again when we dissect the last quarter of 2023 and look forward to big things in terms of social and legislative intervention successfully into 2024 and beyond. We know it's a long journey. Thank you very much to all, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Lloyd, Safri, Don, Dane. We will talk soon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. Keep
I
safe.
know.